When they ripped the panels off my roof, it wasn't the metal that broke. It was something inside me. But before that day, I believed sunlight couldn't be owned. I was wrong. My name is Marin Blake, and 3 months before that day, I thought I'd finally escape the noise of the world. I'd left behind a decade in the city, a blur of overwork, sleepless nights, and the kind of burnout that eats away at your sense of purpose. I was an electrical engineer who used to design energy systems for corporate clients. But the irony was, I couldn't keep my own life powered. So I sold my downtown condo, packed up my tools, and moved into a quiet, planned neighborhood just outside Summit Creek, hoping for peace and maybe a little silence. From the outside, the community looked like everything I thought I needed. Rows of identical houses lined with freshly painted fences, lawns trimmed so evenly it felt unnatural. When I first drove in, the gates swung open automatically. A polished brass sign above them read, "Harmony Estates, where beauty meets order." I should have known right then that the second half of that slogan would mean trouble. But standing there, I just saw sunlight. Endless, perfect, uninterrupted sunlight glinting off rooftops. It felt like an invitation. My plan was simple: install a small solar setup, reduce my bills, and live cleaner. That first week, I unpacked my panels one by one. Smooth black rectangles gleaming like mirrors. I can still remember the scent of new wiring insulation, the low hum of my drill, the way the panels caught the late afternoon sun and turned it into quiet promise. Each bolt I tightened felt like reclaiming control of my life. I was halfway through mounting the third panel when a woman from across the street waved politely. She wore a pastel visor and clutched a clipboard like a weapon disguised as an accessory. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she called out. "Just remember, everything's supposed to look uniform here. You might want to check the guidelines before you get too far ahead." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That was my first introduction to the HOA, though I didn't know her name yet. I just laughed it off. I'd read through the packet the realtor gave me, pages of community codes about lawn length, mailbox height, and fence paint colors. I hadn't seen a single line about solar panels. Maybe it was under the landscaping section, I thought. Or maybe she was just being nosy. Either way, I wasn't worried. I had permits. The installation was by the book, and I believed facts always won. Days passed quietly. I'd work from home during the mornings, then climb onto the roof to check voltage readings by sunset. There was something calming about it. The smell of pine drifting from nearby woods, the distant sound of kids playing on bicycles, the shimmer of glass reflecting the orange sky. I felt grounded again, like I was rebuilding something that mattered. Then came the small things. The signs I brushed off too easily. A neighbor who stopped waving. A man walking his dog who stared too long at my roof. A friendly couple who used to chat suddenly avoided eye contact. The air shifted and I couldn't quite explain how. It was as if invisible lines were being drawn around me, quiet judgments carried on manicured breezes. One evening, I was kneeling beside my inverter box when I heard a voice behind me. "You're Marin, right? New homeowner on Sycamore?" I turned. The man was tall, mid-40s, clean-cut in that suburban way that made his politeness feel like a script. He extended his hand. "Gregory Vale, HOA president, just doing my rounds." I shook his hand, the gesture firm but uneasy. He smiled, calm, calculated. His eyes darted up to the panels. "That's quite a setup you've got there. Impressive work. But I'm afraid it might be non-compliant with our community aesthetic." I frowned. "Aesthetic?" He gave a light laugh, the kind that carried no humor. "We try to maintain a certain visual balance. Black panels against tan rooftops stand out a bit too much, don't you think?" "I'm sure you understand." I did not. But I nodded anyway, because something about his tone warned me that this wasn't a conversation I could win on logic. "If there's an issue," I said carefully, "I'm happy to discuss it with the board." "Of course," he replied, his voice smooth as glass. "We'll be in touch." That night, the neighborhood lights glowed like rows of obedient stars while mine flickered uncertainly. I remember standing at my window watching the panels on my roof gleam faintly under the moonlight. They looked beautiful and then suddenly vulnerable. The next morning, when I opened my door, the world felt different. The air was colder, the silence thicker. And there it was, a single sheet of paper taped neatly to my front door. The HOA's official letterhead gleamed in blue ink, the kind of formal typography that pretends to sound reasonable while cutting deep. Notice of violation. Cease solar installation immediately. You are in breach of HOA Regulation 43. For a moment, I just stood there, reading and rereading the words. The street was quiet, but I could feel eyes watching from behind curtains. My panels still glimmered on the roof, reflecting the morning light, stubborn, defiant, alive. That was the first time I realized sunlight could have enemies, and mine had just introduced themselves. Cease solar installation immediately. HOA Violation 43. He stood in my driveway with a clipboard, smiling like he owned the sky above my house. That morning, the sunlight felt different. Too bright. Almost intrusive. Maybe it was because I knew they were watching me now. The HOA letter from the day before still sat on my kitchen counter, crisp and unread beyond the first sentence. But I wasn't the type to back down because of a piece of paper. So I went outside, determined to finish my wiring before noon. The sound of my drill filled the stillness, echoing down the perfect row of identical houses. Then came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I turned, and there he was, Gregory Vale, the man whose signature sat neatly under the words, "Cease installation immediately." He was everything you'd expect from a suburban authority figure. Polished loafers, ironed khakis, a navy blue polo embroidered with the HOA crest. Even his hair looked like it had bylaws. He smiled with a kind of professional warmth that carried no real heat. "Good morning, Ms. Blake. I hope you got our notice. I wanted to discuss it personally before things get complicated." I wiped my hands on my jeans and forced a smile back. I read it. There must be a misunderstanding. I reviewed the state's solar access code before installing. Everything's compliant. Gregory's eyes drifted to the roof, squinting like the panels offended him. "You seem like a reasonable woman. I'm sure you understand that our community prides itself on aesthetic balance, uniformity. These panels," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "disrupt that balance." "Aesthetic balance?" I repeated, almost laughing. "They're solar panels, not graffiti." Behind him, I heard the scrape of sandals against pavement. Sandra Pike, a woman in her 60s with the sharp eyes of someone who thrived on neighborhood gossip, had appeared across the street. She stood with folded arms, her lips curved in polite disapproval. "I told you, Greg," Sandra called out. "It's not about the technology, it's about tone. The panels just look industrial." Gregory nodded, like she'd just given expert testimony. "Exactly, Sandra. We have to consider community cohesion." Then to me, "You understand, don't you? Rules are what keep neighborhoods like this from falling apart." Something inside me bristled. "With all due respect," I said evenly, "clean energy isn't chaos, it's progress. These panels reduce my footprint, lower the grid load, and help the environment. If anything, I'm improving the community." His smile didn't falter, but his tone sharpened. "That's not the point, Ms. Blake. The HOA bylaws give the board authority to regulate visible modifications. Your installation violates Section 8, Article D, Exterior Uniformity Clause." I crossed my arms. "The same clause that covers mailbox paint colors? It doesn't override state law. The California Solar Rights Act protects installations like mine. Your aesthetic argument won't hold up." Gregory raised an eyebrow, pretending to consider my words before replying. "Then I suppose we'll have to let the process play out. But you should know, while the board reviews your case, fines will accumulate. $250 per day. That's standard for non-compliance." It hit me like a slow wave. They didn't need to break the panels. They could bleed me dry instead. Every rule, every notice, all of it crafted to suffocate through paperwork. Sandra added softly, You could have just asked permission first, dear. Everyone here does. I didn't realize I needed permission to use my own roof, I said. Gregory chuckled lightly as if humoring a naive child. You joined this community, Ms. Blake. That means you agreed to its principles. The board exists to preserve property values, and we take that seriously. You wouldn't want your choices to make others uncomfortable, would you? It was that last sentence that chilled me. Make others uncomfortable. That's how power cloaks itself in civility. By pretending tyranny is just concern. Gregory handed me a duplicate notice, perfectly folded. I'll give you 48 hours to reconsider before enforcement begins. I hope we can resolve this amicably. He turned to leave, Sandra trailing behind him like a shadow of approval. Their voices faded as they reached the sidewalk, talking about lawn care and weekend meetings, as if threatening a neighbor's livelihood was just another item on their to-do list. I stood there in the sunlight, watching their backs, my heart pounding against my ribs. The panels glimmered above me, quiet, loyal, alive. I ran my hand along the smooth edge of one, feeling the heat pulsing through the metal. That heat wasn't just energy anymore. It was defiance. But when I stepped back inside, something new caught my eye through the front window. Gregory had returned briefly, accompanied by another board member. Together, they hammered a laminated sheet onto the wooden gate at the edge of my property. The words were large enough for the entire street to see. Notice of violation. Property non-compliant. My name sat in bold black letters beneath it, like a public warning. The neighborhood that once smiled at me now stared through blinds. And that was the day I realized Gregory Vale didn't just run the HOA. He ruled the illusion of order itself. HOA posts a notice of violation across her property gate. Public humiliation. Every morning, another envelope, another threat, another reminder that freedom had an HOA fee. It didn't take long for the letters to start multiplying. One on Monday, two on Wednesday. By Friday, they came daily. White envelopes with the HOA's navy blue seal stamped like a brand. I stopped opening them after the fifth one. They all said the same thing: violation, non-compliance, immediate action required. The language was sterile, bureaucratic, and cruelly polite. The kind of wording designed to sound lawful while tightening a noose around your peace. At first, I tried to laugh it off. I told myself they were bluffing. That reason would eventually win. But reason doesn't live in places like Harmony Estates. Control does. Within a week, I received my first fine, $250, followed by another 3 days later, then another. Each notice warned of additional penalties for continued defiance. I'd wake up to the sound of paper rustling against my door, like some twisted morning ritual. One day, they even slid a letter under my garage door. Failure to comply, it read, may result in lien action against your property. I remember standing there in the half-light of my garage, feeling my hands tremble. Lien action. They could take my house over sunlight. The neighborhood changed too. The same people who once waved now turned their heads when I passed. Conversations on the sidewalk stopped the moment I stepped outside. The cul-de-sac gatherings that used to spill with laughter turned quiet whenever I approached. I could almost hear my name whispered between their drinks. That's her, the one fighting the board. The isolation crept in like fog, slow, heavy, inescapable. It's not the noise that breaks you in these battles. It's the silence. Then came the inspections. Men in polos and name tags I didn't recognize walked around my property with tablets, snapping pictures of my roof, driveway, even my mailbox. When I stepped outside to ask what they were doing, one of them flashed a document. Routine property compliance review, he said flatly. I asked who authorized it. The HOA, he replied, not meeting my eyes. It felt invasive, predatory, like being audited by people who already decided you were guilty. That evening, I found a note tucked under my doormat. Refusal to allow inspection will be treated as non-cooperation. I sat on the porch steps that night. The light from the setting sun sliding off the panels above me. My fingers ached from clenching the stack of fines I'd gathered over the past 2 weeks. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about power. Their need to remind me that I didn't truly own what I'd worked for. And that's when I met Eli Rowan. He lived 3 houses down. A quiet man in his 60s with a soft voice and hands that looked permanently stained from years of work. I'd seen him walking his dog before, but we'd never spoken. That evening, he stopped near my gate, hesitating before approaching. "Marin," he asked, "I saw what they posted on your fence. Thought you could use someone who's been there before." He wasn't wearing the HOA smile, that practiced look of neighborly control. His was different. Genuine. Worn. We talked until the sun disappeared. Eli told me he used to be an electrician, retired now, but he'd seen this game play out before. "They push until you bend," he said. "It's never about the panels. It's about reminding you they can reach into your life anytime they want." He explained something I didn't know, that most states, including ours, had solar access laws designed to protect homeowners like me. But HOAs use loopholes, he said, tapping the notice I held. "See that word? Aesthetic? It's vague on purpose. They can twist it into anything. Color, angle, reflection, whatever helps them block your system. They don't outlaw solar. They just strangle it with paperwork." I asked him why no one fought back. He gave a dry laugh. "Because they make you feel alone. You think you're the only one crazy enough to stand up to them. And after a while, you start to believe it." His words stuck with me long after he left. I sat outside until the stars appeared, tracing the outlines of the panels overhead. They seemed smaller somehow, like targets. Days blurred into each other. Letters, fines, and visits, all blending into the same pattern of harassment wrapped in civility. My work began to suffer. Focus became impossible. Even my sister, who used to call every night, started asking if I should just take them down to keep the peace. That's the thing about slow intimidation. It wears down not just your will, but your support system. One evening, I came home to find another envelope taped to my garage. This one wasn't like the others. It was printed on bright red paper, bold enough for the entire street to see. My stomach tightened before I even read it. Notice: emergency compliance inspection scheduled. Property subject to review. No signature. No explanation. Just a date and time. 2 days away. They weren't warning me anymore. They were coming. I stood there in the driveway as dusk settled over the houses, the sky burning orange above the rooftops. My panels shimmered faintly in the dying light, still doing exactly what they were built to do: harness freedom. But now I understood what Eli meant. In neighborhoods like this, freedom always comes with a price. HOA schedules an emergency compliance inspection without consent. When I pulled into my driveway and saw strangers on my roof, I realized this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about power. 2 days after the red notice, I came home early from a supply run, half expecting to find Gregory Vale waiting with another warning. Instead, I found 3 men I had never seen before on top of my house. They were moving fast, wrenching, unbolting, stacking. My solar panels. My panels. For a split second, my mind refused to believe it. The sound hit next. The metallic scrape of glass against metal, the hiss of screws tearing out of mounts. Every noise landed like a punch. I dropped my bag and ran across the lawn, shouting, "What are you doing? Get off my roof." One of the men looked down, startled, but didn't stop. "HOA order, ma'am," he called. "Emergency enforcement." My heart slammed against my ribs. "You don't have authorization to touch my property," I yelled, grabbing my phone to record. They ignored me. A panel slipped, tilted, then crashed against the driveway, shattering into 1,000 glittering fragments that caught the sun like broken mirrors. I was shaking, not from fear, but from fury so raw it made my vision blur. My own home had become a crime scene, and I was the only one who seemed to see it. Within minutes, a black SUV pulled up. Gregory Vale stepped out, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, as if he were arriving at a corporate meeting instead of an act of vandalism. "Ms. Blake," he said calmly, "please don't interfere. The board has voted unanimously on an emergency removal due to safety concerns." "Safety concerns?" I said, my voice cracking. "You think trespassing with power tools is safe?" He sighed, gesturing toward the men on the roof. "One of your panels reflected sunlight into a neighbor's window. There's precedent for glare complaints. We're within our rights." I took a step closer, fists trembling. "You're not within anything. You're violating state law. The California Civil Code 714 explicitly protects solar installations. You can't remove anything without a court order or my consent." Gregory's lips curved into that faint, patient smile he always used before he said something cruel. "This isn't a removal, Ms. Blake. It's a temporary enforcement action. If you want them back, you can appeal to the board in writing." "Appeal? To the same people who ordered this?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned to one of the workers. "If you don't stop right now, I'm calling the police." He hesitated, glancing nervously at Gregory. "He said he's the authority here." "I'm the homeowner," I snapped. By the time the officers arrived, 3 panels lay in pieces across my driveway. The men stood off to the side, waiting. Gregory greeted the police like old friends, shaking hands before I could even explain. "Just a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "Routine HOA maintenance." I showed them the letters, the videos, everything, but the officers' faces stayed neutral. "This sounds civil, ma'am," one of them said. "You might need to take it up with the county." Civil. That word landed harder than any blow. Watching Gregory hand back his clipboard with a smile, I realized how deep his influence ran. In communities like this, control didn't need force. It needed paperwork and patience. The system wasn't built to protect me. It was built to protect him. When the workers finally left, the yard looked like a war zone. Shattered panels lay scattered across the grass, wiring dangling like veins torn from a body. The smell of burnt plastic hung in the air. I sat on the curb, staring at what was left of months of work, and for the first time since moving to Harmony Estates, I felt powerless in every sense of the word. That night, I called my insurance company, desperate for help. The representative on the line sounded sympathetic until she reached the claim details. "I'm sorry, Ms. Blake," she said carefully, "but damages caused by a recognized homeowners association action fall under the Community Enforcement Clause. It's excluded from coverage." Excluded, meaning they could destroy my property, and no one, not the police, not my insurer, would hold them accountable. When the call ended, I sat in the dark, the house too quiet. The air was thick, the kind that presses down until breathing feels like defiance. Outside, the empty roof glared back at the moon, stripped of everything I had built. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, staring at the black horizon and feeling something harden inside me. If they wanted darkness, they'd have it, for now. But this wasn't the end. "They took my light." I whispered into the silence, the words more vow than statement. "I'll take back the grid." Marin sits on her dark porch, vowing silently. "They took my light. I'll take back the grid." It's strange how the quiet feels different when you know you've been silenced. For days after the destruction, my house sat in darkness, the kind that hums like a wound you can't stop touching. The evenings stretched long and heavy. The power bills crept higher, and every creak of the empty roof reminded me of what they'd taken. I stopped cooking, stopped checking emails, stopped pretending to sleep. I'd sit by the window long after midnight, watching the perfect line of houses across the street, each one glowing under identical porch lights. Mine stayed black, a scar in the symmetry. I wasn't just tired, I was emptied out. My tools sat untouched in the garage, dust settling on the boxes that once held panels, cables, inverters. The sound of my own drill, once a comfort, now felt like a reminder of defeat. That's what they wanted, to make me believe resistance wasn't worth the noise. On the 4th night, a soft knock broke the silence. When I opened the door, Eli Rowan stood there. holding 2 cups of coffee. His face was lined, his eyes tired but steady. "You look like hell," he said gently, handing me one. "I feel worse." He stepped inside without asking, glancing up at the bare roof through the window. "Gregory Vale's proud of himself," he muttered. "He did this to my friend 2 streets over. Different reason, wrong fence height, but same playbook." I sank into a chair. "So what did your friend do?" Eli shrugged. "Sold the house, moved out." I let out a hollow laugh. "Maybe that's what I should do." He shook his head. "Not you, you're too damn stubborn. And smart." The word smart hit like a challenge. I hadn't felt smart in weeks, but something about Eli's calm, the quiet certainty in his voice, made a crack in the fog I'd been living in. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn folder. "I was an electrician for 30 years. Worked with the county on energy projects before I retired. You ever heard of microgrids?" The term sparked a faint flicker in my mind. "You mean local, self-sustaining power systems?" He nodded. "Independent energy clusters. Some states treat them as separate utilities, outside HOA jurisdiction. You build it right, certify it right, they can't touch it. Not legally." The words settled deep, like seeds finding soil. For the first time since that day, I felt the faint pulse of purpose returning. "Show me," I said. The next few nights turned into quiet research marathons. My dining table became a war room of open binders, printouts, and legal codes. Eli sat across from me, glasses sliding down his nose as he read. We studied state energy statutes, solar access laws, and the tangled mess of HOA bylaws that claimed to govern my life. It was a strange kind of hope, the kind that grows not from victory, but from knowing your enemy's language better than they do. I learned that microgrids, in several states, were legally recognized as independent systems when confined to private property and shared among consenting owners. The law was specific. HOAs had no jurisdiction over infrastructure that didn't alter external aesthetics or connect directly to their managed utilities. I underlined that sentence 3 times. Each night, the fear that once filled the house began to shift into focus. I realized that power, real power, wasn't about permission. It was about understanding the rules better than the people who abused them. Eli smiled when he saw my notebook overflowing with notes. "There she is," he said. "That's the Marin I saw up on that roof." But beneath the adrenaline was something deeper, a quiet, simmering rage. I thought about Gregory Vale, about the way he smiled while my panels were torn apart, about how easily he bent the system around his will. For the first time, I didn't just want my panels back. I wanted my autonomy back. I began rereading the HOA's entire charter, line by line. The more I read, the more absurd it became. Pages dedicated to lawn edging, mailbox fonts, approved Christmas light colors. And then, late one night, buried deep under Article X, infrastructure and utility access, I found it. One line, barely a sentence long. The association retains authority over shared utilities visible from common areas. Visible. My pulse quickened. Not connected, not operated, just visible. That single word changed everything. It wasn't a rule, it was an opening. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. The quiet that had haunted me for days now felt different. It wasn't silence anymore. It was the sound of something building. A storm, slow and deliberate. I closed the binder and looked toward the dark window, the roofline barely visible against the night. "If I can't have their light," I whispered, "I'll make my own." Marin uncovers a suspicious clause buried deep in the HOA bylaws. Some rules are written to protect power. Others hide the path to freedom. The night I found it, the house was completely still except for the ticking of the wall clock and the scratch of my pen. I'd been combing through the HOA bylaws for the 3rd straight evening, eyes burning, coffee long gone cold. The words all blurred together. Ordinance, compliance, visibility, aesthetic cohesion, the bureaucratic poetry of control. But then, under Article X, infrastructure and utility access. I saw the line again. The association retains authority over shared utilities visible from common areas. That single word, visible, stopped me cold. I whispered it aloud, testing the shape of it. Visible. Not connected, not installed. Visible. My mind started racing. The HOA's entire argument rested on aesthetics, on what could be seen from the street. What if the system couldn't be seen at all? My hands began trembling as I flipped through state energy codes, cross-referencing clauses like a detective uncovering a crime. According to the California Energy Independence Statute, HOAs had no jurisdiction over subsurface infrastructure or privately shared utilities, as long as they didn't modify visible exteriors. It was right there, legal invisibility. The realization hit me like light breaking through a storm. They had built their power on appearance. Their rules were a mirror, not a wall, and mirrors could be shattered. I tore a page from my notebook and began scribbling furiously. Wiring diagrams, conduit routes, capacity estimates. If I could run an underground line from my garage to a concealed storage unit at the edge of the property, I could create a closed-loop microgrid, a silent system, invisible to their rules. The panels might be gone, but the batteries and converters were still mine. At 2 a.m., I called Eli Rowan. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough but alert. "Marin, it's the middle of the night." "I found it," I said breathlessly. "The clause, they can't control what they can't see. Underground systems are exempt." There was a pause, then the sound of him sitting up. "Say that again." "Article X, line 12. Visibility clause. If it's not visible from a common area, it's outside their jurisdiction. We can build a microgrid below ground." Eli exhaled slowly, the sound half disbelief, half pride. "You realize what you're talking about, right? This isn't just wiring a shed. This is building an independent power system in a community that bans wind chimes." "I know," I said, my voice shaking. "That's why we have to do it right." He arrived the next morning with blueprints rolled under his arm, his old electrician's cap pulled low. Together we spread the papers across my dining table, tracing routes with trembling fingers. We talked about load capacity, safety codes, and concealment, using buried conduit, weatherproof junction boxes, and quiet inverters. Every detail had to be precise. One mistake, and the HOA could claim a violation. But beneath the technical jargon, something deeper pulsed. A shared understanding that this wasn't just a project. It was defiance with a heartbeat. By the time the sun came up, the plan was ready. We'd start small. A subsurface energy hub, powered initially by portable panels and expansion ready for future homes. Invisible, silent, untouchable. As I watched the morning light filter through the blinds, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Control. Hope. Yes, but sharper, edged with fear. Hope makes you dream. Fear makes you careful. I needed both. That evening, while running the first set of underground conduit near my garden, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Across the street, Gregory Vale stood near the curb, his phone raised. For a moment, our eyes met. His expression unreadable, calculating. The faint red light on his phone told me everything. He was filming. My stomach tightened. The game had just changed again. Gregory spots new cables near her garden and starts filming. Every night we worked under tarps. Every hammer strike a heartbeat we prayed no one would hear. We began at sundown. By day, the neighborhood shimmered with perfection. Trimmed lawns, silent sprinklers, curtains drawn in neat obedience. But when the sun dipped and the streetlights hummed on, Eli Rowan and I would pull a dark tarp across the garden and disappear beneath it. The earth was cool and damp, the air thick with the smell of soil and risk. Every motion had to be measured, every whisper deliberate. It started with a single trench. Eli marked the ground with chalk lines, his hands moving confidently despite the tremor of age. "Keep the conduit low," he murmured, kneeling beside me. "No one sees what's buried deep enough." The metallic clink of tools echoed in rhythm with my pulse. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down, the tension of doing something both lawful and forbidden. The first few nights were quiet, too quiet. I found myself flinching at every sound, the hiss of sprinklers, the bark of a distant dog, the whir of a passing drone. Each noise felt like exposure, like Gregory Vale's watchful eyes might be lurking behind every window. But the work continued, piece by piece, wire by wire. Beneath that tarp, fear slowly gave way to purpose. By the third night, we weren't alone. Two neighbors, Maya and Ron Hepler, slipped across the street after dark, their flashlights wrapped in red film to dull the glow. "We heard what happened," Maya whispered, crouching beside me. "Gregory fined us once for hanging a wind chime. If you're building something they can't touch, we want in." I hesitated. Involving others meant more risk, but it also meant solidarity. The HOA thrived on isolation, convincing everyone they were alone in their defiance. For once, I wanted to break that cycle. "All right," I said quietly, "but no one talks about this outside of tonight." That's how it grew, a silent coalition forming under cover of darkness. Eli handled the wiring, I handled the power load calculations, and Maya documented every step for a possible legal defense. Together, we became something the HOA could never predict: organized. The sensory world of those nights is burned into my memory. The grit of soil under my nails, the damp chill of grass against my knees, the faint ozone smell from freshly cut wire. The hum of tools sounded almost alive, like a secret heartbeat beneath the surface of Harmony Estates. Each spark that flickered beneath the tarp reminded me that resistance could be quiet and still burn bright. The deeper we went, the more I learned. Microgrids weren't just backup systems. They were communities in miniature, shared circuits designed to keep people connected when the main grid failed. According to state energy exemptions, shared private circuits were entirely lawful if confined to private property and built in accordance with safety code. In other words, what we were doing wasn't rebellion. It was compliance with freedom written between the lines of law. Still, every step forward carried risk. We stored cables inside hollow garden boxes, disguised junction boxes as sprinkler timers, and ran the inverter line beneath the hedge. Each time I buried a section of conduit, I imagined Gregory Vale's reaction if he ever found out. He'd call it sabotage. I called it survival. Some nights, exhaustion pressed so hard it felt like gravity. I'd pause, stare at the quiet row of houses, and wonder if this secrecy was what freedom always looked like. Hidden, fragile, desperate. Eli must have sensed it. One night, as I tightened a connection near the garage, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're building more than power, Marin," he said softly. "You're building proof that they don't own you." His words carried me through the rest of the week, and on the seventh night, when we flipped the final breaker, the underground system came alive with a low, steady hum. No lights flashed, no alarms blared. The microgrid breathed silently beneath us, invisible and independent. We'd done it. For the first time since they'd torn the panels from my roof, my home was mine again, powered not by their grid, but by my will. I fell asleep that night feeling something close to peace, lulled by the faint pulse of the hidden current running through the ground. Morning shattered that peace. I woke to a knock, then to Maya's voice outside calling my name, sharp and panicked. I rushed out to find the entire cul-de-sac plastered with identical letters. The HOA seal glared from every mailbox in sight. Notice of violation. Unauthorized modifications detected. All homeowners within the affected zone are under review. Gregory had found his proof. Marin wakes to find HOA violation letters plastered across her neighbors' mailboxes. By morning, my quiet street looked like a battlefield. Only the weapons were letters and threats. When I stepped outside that morning, the cul-de-sac didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a crime scene wrapped in politeness. Every mailbox was stamped with the same warning. Thick paper, Navy seal, perfect penmanship, like fear dressed up for church. Neighbors stood on their driveways clutching envelopes, murmuring to one another in uneasy tones. Some avoided my eyes, others just stared, half curious, half afraid. At the center of the street stood Gregory Vale, clipboard in hand, voice calm but carrying authority that silenced everyone around him. Beside him was a sheriff's deputy, one hand resting casually on his belt. The badge glinted in the morning sun, legal muscle disguised as community service. "Ms. Blake," Gregory called when he saw me, his tone unnervingly cheerful. "So glad you could join us. We were just about to begin." I walked down the driveway barefoot, my heart pounding steady but slow. "What is this, Gregory?" He gestured toward the group of homeowners. "An emergency HOA meeting. Given recent activities beneath your property, the board has determined that immediate action is required to maintain community safety." "Beneath my property?" I said, voice level. "You mean my private wiring, the one that's legal under state microgrid code?" He ignored that. "You've created an unauthorized energy network, Miss Blake. According to Section 12 of our bylaws, that qualifies as a safety hazard." The deputy stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "I have a cease and desist order signed by the HOA board. It directs you to immediately discontinue all energy operations and dismantle your system until further review." I took the document, reading it slowly. It wasn't a court order. It wasn't even notarized. Just another piece of HOA stationery dressed in intimidation. I looked up at the deputy. "This has no legal authority. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over subsurface wiring or private energy storage. You can't enforce this." Gregory's polite smile faltered. "You've endangered the community, Ms. Blake. You're running an unregulated grid. Do you understand the liability?" I met his gaze. "Actually, I do. Under the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act, or PURPA, small-scale renewable generators like mine are protected. Federal law recognizes microgrids as non-utility entities as long as they don't distribute power for profit. Which means," I paused, letting the silence stretch, "I'm well within my rights." A ripple went through the small crowd. Even the deputy hesitated, eyes flicking between us. Gregory's jaw tightened. "You've been very busy, haven't you?" "Just educated," I said evenly. For the first time since I'd met him, Gregory's mask slipped. His voice sharpened, no longer the calm tone of a bureaucrat but the crack of a man losing control. "You think you can embarrass me in front of this community? You've poisoned this neighborhood with your arrogance." I took a slow step closer. "No, Gregory. You did that the day you decided sunlight was your property." The deputy intervened before it went further, muttering something about de-escalation. Gregory waved him off, composing himself again with visible effort. "Very well," he said finally. "You leave me no choice." He looked around, addressing the onlookers. "For the record, Ms. Blake is now in violation of multiple HOA regulations and is being referred for civil litigation." The words hung in the air like a sentence being read. The neighbors murmured, shifting uneasily. I watched Gregory hand the deputy a folder thick with documents, his weaponized paperwork. He turned back to me, that smug composure returning like a mask sliding into place. "You've forced my hand. You'll be hearing from our attorneys." I didn't flinch. "Then I'll see you in court." He gave a shallow nod, then walked away, the deputy trailing behind him. The small crowd dispersed, whispering as they went. Within minutes, the street looked normal again, but the illusion was gone. Back inside, I spread the cease and desist across my table. It trembled slightly under the breeze from the window, the HOA seal catching the light. I wasn't scared anymore. I was done playing defense. They'd declared war in ink. I'd answer in law. Gregory files a lawsuit. HOA versus Marin Blake. They called me a threat to order. I called it owning my roof. The courthouse in Summit Creek wasn't built for drama, but that morning it felt like a stage. The air inside was thick with murmurs, the smell of polished wood and old paper mixing with tension. The benches were filled with neighbors, some curious, some loyal to the HOA, and a few who had quietly joined my cause. Cameras from the local news station lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like unblinking eyes. When my name was called, I stood and felt the full weight of the moment press against my chest. Across the aisle, Gregory Vale sat flanked by two attorneys, one young and sharp, the other older, with the weary confidence of someone who'd won too many cases through intimidation. Gregory didn't look at me. He was already smiling for the reporters. The proceedings began with the HOA's attorney, Mr. Kessler, a man who spoke as if the room owed him silence. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about innovation. It is about defiance. Ms. Blake knowingly violated community regulations, constructed an unapproved power network, and endangered property values across Harmony Estates. The board acted within its rights to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood." His tone was slick, rehearsed. Every phrase felt designed to sound reasonable until you listened closely enough to hear the threat beneath it. I sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. When it was my turn, I stood. I wasn't represented by a full attorney, only legal aid counsel who'd helped me file the response, but I had something Gregory's team didn't: truth, documentation, and the law they thought I'd never read. "Your Honor," I said, facing Judge Lenora Shaw, whose calm expression gave nothing away, "this case isn't about defiance. It's about ownership of my property, my energy, and my right to exist without constant surveillance." A rustle moved through the crowd. I took a deep breath and continued. "The HOA claims I created an illegal power system, but under California Civil Code 714, and more importantly, the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act, small renewable systems that serve private property are fully legal and recognized as independent. My microgrid doesn't feed into public infrastructure. It doesn't alter visible aesthetics. And every single wire was installed to code." Kessler interrupted, voice rising. "She's not a licensed contractor, Your Honor. She lacks authority." I turned toward him. "I'm a licensed electrical engineer. I submitted every schematic to the county energy office before installation. Would you like to see the approval stamp?" Judge Shaw raised a hand, silencing both of us. "Ms. Blake, continue." I nodded. "This is bigger than me. If the HOA can dictate what technology we're allowed to use based on how it looks, they can control progress itself. My panels weren't an eyesore. They were a solution. And what's really being protected here isn't beauty, it's power." I could feel the atmosphere shifting. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, her gaze narrowing with interest. "You're referring to property rights versus aesthetic control?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "There's precedent in Anderson v. Sunfield HOA, 2012. The court ruled that community covenants cannot override state renewable energy protections. That's the law. And I followed it." Silence filled the room. Gregory finally looked at me, his face tight, the confident mask beginning to crack. His lawyer whispered something frantically, flipping through a binder of statutes he hadn't expected me to know. Judge Shaw adjusted her glasses, studying me for a long moment before speaking. "You've presented substantial evidence, Ms. Blake. The court acknowledges that your installation appears compliant with both safety and property statutes." A flicker of relief surged through me, until she added, "However, before issuing a verdict, I want to see it for myself." Kessler frowned. "Your Honor." She raised a hand. "The court will conduct an on-site inspection of Ms. Blake's property and energy system before ruling. If it's as she claims, compliant, non-invasive, and legal, the board's case will be reconsidered." The gavel struck once, sharp as a thunderclap. The murmurs returned, rising into a hum that filled the room. Gregory's knuckles whitened against the table. For the first time since this war began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. As I left the courtroom, the reporters swarmed, asking if I thought I'd win. I didn't answer, because this wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about being seen. Judge orders an official on-site inspection before verdict. When the judge stepped into my yard and the lights came alive, even she smiled. The truth doesn't need permission to shine. The morning of the inspection arrived cold and bright. I barely slept, spending the night checking every cable, every buried line, every switch. It wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was the weight of years of control pressing against a single moment of truth. If anything was out of place, Gregory Vale would twist it, distort it, and feed it to the court as proof that I was reckless. By 9 o'clock, a black sedan rolled up my driveway. Judge Lenora Shaw stepped out, clipboard in hand, her gray coat brushing the tops of her boots. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes carried a quiet curiosity. Behind her came Gregory, looking immaculate as always, though the tightness around his mouth betrayed nerves. 2 HOA board members followed, clutching binders, while several neighbors gathered near the sidewalk, whispering like spectators before a verdict. "Ms. Blake," Judge Shaw said, shaking my hand. "Let's see this system of yours." I led her toward the garden, explaining as I went. The microgrid runs underground from the garage to a sealed junction unit here. Everything meets state code. Temperature rated, moisture sealed, grounded per NEC 690. My voice stayed steady, even as Gregory trailed behind us, muttering faintly to his attorney. When I lifted the hatch, the faint hum of current filled the air. A sound as soft as breath but alive with quiet defiance. The judge crouched down, studying the setup, her gloved fingers tracing the edge of the housing. "It's clean," she said finally. "No exposed lines, no risk factors. It's impressive, Miss Blake." Gregory stepped forward quickly. "Your Honor, she's concealing unapproved components. Judge Shaw raised a hand without looking at him. "Mr. Vale, I said I would inspect, not speculate." I hid a smile. Then I turned the key on the inverter, and the lights flickered on. Soft, golden, seamless. Every bulb in the house glowed at once, powered by the current running quietly beneath our feet. The crowd of neighbors gasped. Some even clapped before Gregory silenced them with a glare. "This system," I said, "is entirely self-contained. It doesn't feed into the municipal grid. It doesn't violate visual standards. And as you can see, it's stable." Eli Rowan stepped forward next, carrying a clipboard of his own. "Retired electrician, Your Honor. I've verified the installation personally. She's in full compliance with both local and state safety codes." Judge Shaw nodded, taking notes. "And the HOA's claim of illegal distribution?" I handed her the document I'd been saving, the official approval from the county's Renewable Energy Division. Her eyes scanned it quickly before passing it to Gregory's attorney. "Stamped, approved, and dated," she said evenly. "Mr. Vale, would you like to explain why your filing includes a conflicting document?" Gregory's attorney hesitated. "There must be a clerical—" The judge cut him off. "Clerical errors don't come with forged signatures." The crowd murmured louder now. Gregory's color drained as she turned to him fully. "Mr. Vale, your association not only violated California Civil Code 714, which guarantees solar and renewable rights, but also committed trespass under Penal Code 602 when you ordered those panels removed." "I've seen enough." Her words hit like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Judge Shaw closed her clipboard, voice firm but calm. "This court rules in favor of Ms. Blake. The HOA is fined $25,000 for unlawful interference and document falsification. Furthermore, Article X of the Harmony Estates bylaws will be rewritten to align with state renewable protections." For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then applause rippled across the street. Neighbors clapping, some cheering outright. Eli exhaled beside me, eyes bright. Gregory didn't speak. He just turned and walked away, his authority dissolving with every step. The next morning, the headline appeared in the local paper, "The Woman Who Beat the HOA." Written by Devin Caro, the journalist who'd quietly attended the hearing, the article spread faster than any rumor Gregory had ever whispered. And as I stood on my porch, sunlight spilling across my yard, I realized it wasn't just my home that was lit again. It was the truth itself. Local journalist Devin Caro publishes The woman who beat the HOA. A year later, every porch on my street glows with the power they tried to steal from me. It's strange how quiet victory can be. There are no parades, no fireworks, just the low, steady hum of energy running through wires I'd buried beneath the earth. What started as my rebellion has become our lifeline. My microgrid now powers 9 homes and Harmony estates, including the same ones that once called my panels an eyesore. Every evening, when the sun drops and the streetlights flicker on, I can see the proof of what we built. Porches glowing soft gold, kitchen windows alive with laughter, air conditioners humming in perfect rhythm. The power isn't just electrical anymore. It's symbolic. It's ours. The first few months after the verdict were tense. Gregory Vale stayed on the HOA board, trying to claw back what little control he had left. But his power had dimmed. At meetings, residents began questioning decisions instead of nodding along. The spell was broken. Eventually, Gregory resigned, citing health reasons, though everyone knew it was pride that had finally collapsed under the weight of truth. The day he left, Sandra Pike, the same neighbor who once called my panels industrial, came to my door holding a potted plant. Her hands trembled when she offered it. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "You didn't ruin this neighborhood. You saved it." I didn't say anything for a moment. Forgiveness doesn't arrive easily when you've lived through months of hostility, but I took the plant anyway. "Thank you, Sandra," I told her. "You can plug your house into the grid next week if you'd like." She smiled through tears, nodding. That night, the grid expanded again. With Eli's help, we ran a new circuit into Sandra's home, completing the loop that now tied us all together. Former enemies connected through the very power they'd tried to destroy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Months later, the State Department of Energy reached out. They wanted to recognize what we'd done as one of the first legal residential microgrids in the county. They sent a small delegation to tour the site. Standing there with Eli, surrounded by state officials, I realized the moment was bigger than both of us. This wasn't just about beating an HOA. It was about proving that freedom, when built carefully, can be lawful and lasting. When the cameras clicked, Eli whispered, "You didn't just take back your light, Marin. You gave it to everyone else." I still think about that sometimes when I stand on my porch at night, watching the glow stretch from house to house. The neighborhood feels different now, less controlled, more alive. Children play on lawns again, and nobody measures their grass. The bylaws still exist, but they've lost their sting. But peace in places like this is never permanent. One evening, as the sun sank low and the hum of the microgrid deepened into the soil, a car I didn't recognize pulled up to my house. A man in a crisp gray suit stepped out, clipboard in hand. He smiled too easily, the way Gregory used to. "Good evening, Ms. Blake," he said. "I'm the new community compliance officer for Harmony Estates, just here to make sure everything stays consistent." The faint buzz of the power lines filled the silence between us. I felt that old tension rise again, not fear, but readiness. Because if they'd forgotten who built the light that powers this street, I was prepared to remind them. A new community compliance officer knocks at her door. Sequel setup. They tried to own the sunlight, but you can't fence in what was made for everyone. When I look back now, it's strange to think how small it all seemed at first. A few panels, a dream of independence, a woman trying to live quietly. I never set out to make a point. I just wanted to live by my principles. Clean energy, self-reliance, responsibility for the world I'd one day leave behind. But that's the thing about control. It never asks permission to enter your life. It disguises itself as order, as civility, until one day you wake up realizing your freedom has a price tag and your signature is already on the bill. For me, it started with a notice taped to my door. For others, it might be something smaller, a letter about lawn height, a fine for painting a door the wrong shade of blue. It's not about the rules themselves. It's about the people who use them as levers. Gregory Vale wasn't protecting property values. He was protecting the illusion of power. The HOA was never about harmony. It was about hierarchy. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. The fight taught me something essential. Courage doesn't come in one grand burst of rebellion. It comes in quiet moments. The decision to keep showing up, to keep building, to keep believing that you're not crazy for wanting autonomy in a system built to erase it. Every late night under the tarp, every letter I refused to obey, every stare from a neighbor, it all became part of something bigger than I ever planned. People ask me if I regret it, if it was worth the stress, the fear, the lawsuits. The answer is simple: absolutely. Because for every panel they tore down, I learned how to build something stronger. They took my light, and I turned it into a network that no one could touch. That's what real freedom is. It's not the absence of opposition. It's the refusal to surrender when opposition comes. Legally, my case set a small precedent. The county officially recognized that homeowners associations cannot override state renewable energy statutes. In plain English, your HOA doesn't own your sky. If you live in a controlled community, you have rights. Always read your bylaws. Always check your state's solar access and microgrid laws. The language may look boring, but buried in those pages are the loopholes that separate submission from sovereignty. That's the part most people don't realize. Power, whether electrical or political, doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from knowledge. When Gregory Vale stood in my driveway quoting his aesthetic clauses, he assumed I wouldn't know the law that protected me. Most people don't, and that's how they win, through ignorance dressed as authority. If my story means anything, it's this: you don't have to wait for permission to do what's right. You just have to do it responsibly, intelligently, and with conviction. The law, when you learn it, can be both sword and shield. Eli Rowan used to say, "Freedom isn't granted, it's wired." I didn't understand that at first, but now, when I walk outside at dusk and see the lights across the street powered by the same system they tried to destroy, I finally get it. Freedom isn't something you inherit. It's something you build, piece by piece, circuit by circuit, law by law. Sometimes it's buried underground, invisible. Sometimes it's a light glowing quietly through someone's window. But it's always there, waiting for someone brave enough to flip the switch. So if you ever find yourself staring down an institution that tells you what you can't do on land you own, remember this: the moment you stop believing they have the right to define your limits is the moment you begin to reclaim them. Sunlight belongs to everyone. You can regulate paint colors and fence heights, but you can't legislate the sky. What would you have done if your own neighborhood tried to steal your sunlight? Would you fight back or give in to their rules? Tell me in the comments if you've ever faced an HOA or any power-drunk authority trying to control your home. Your story might be the next one I tell here. And if you believe freedom should never come with an HOA fee, hit subscribe and share this video. Let's keep the lights on for everyone who refuses to bow down.